If coding interviews have you stressed out, then you came to the right video. You see, I used to be like you. However, after doing close to 100 interviews throughout my career, my initial anxiety around interviewing has gone down significantly. I won't lie to you and say that interviewing doesn't stress me out. I think it stresses everyone out. But doing all these interviews has taught me that mindset is everything. It's the same mindset that I was able to use to go on back to back interviews at top tech companies and eventually land my first FANG job. That's why I'm going to share 5 tips to help you overcome interview anxiety and hopefully land you your dream job. The reason why I know these tips work is because they work for me. And I'm not special. I'm not a genius or anything like that. I'm just a regular guy who had to figure all this stuff out himself. So just sit back and listen as I give you actionable tips you can use to stop feeling so anxious for coding interviews. Starting with tip number 5, which is that stress is okay. Feeling the pressure before a coding interview is normal. In fact, instead of eliminating stress, you should instead learn how to embrace it and use it to your advantage. So, how can you do that? When it comes to stress, there's a sweet spot we should aim for. It's called eustress. This is the level of stress that's actually beneficial for us. It keeps us motivated, focused, and ready to tackle challenges. On the other hand, if our stress levels are too low, we might feel bored or unmotivated. And if they're too high, we risk feeling overwhelmed or burned out. So, how do we find this sweet spot? Well, it's all about balance. We want to challenge ourselves enough to keep things interesting and push our limits, but not so much that we feel completely overwhelmed. One way to do this is by setting realistic goals for ourselves. Break down your task into smaller, more manageable chunks and set achievable milestones along the way. This could mean studying for an hour or two, 4 days a week, or only focusing on one problem type, like only studying graph problems. Keeping things small and manageable is a great way to not only maintain focus, but also avoid burnout. It's also important to practice self-care. Just because you're preparing for a coding interview doesn't mean you have to neglect things like exercise, reading a good book, or spending time with friends and family. It's small things like this that can help you recharge and take away some stress. By being cognizant of your stress levels, you can keep your stress in check and hopefully reach eustress. While managing stress is important, you also need to have the right perspective. This leads me to tip number 4, which is contextualizing outcomes. Instead of letting the outcome of a coding interview define you, it's crucial to contextualize it within the broader scope of your interview preparation and overall growth. Basically, don't let one bad interview define you. I know it's easy to be hard on yourself, especially after bombing an interview, but being negative isn't going to do you any good. Instead, you need to view it as a learning opportunity. You need to dive deep and see where you struggled the most. Did you struggle with a specific algorithm or data structure? Did you face difficulties communicating your thought process? Your answer dictates your next move and what else you should focus on. Just know that your preparation up to that point hasn't been a waste. Understand that setbacks are a natural part of the learning process and everyone experiences them at some point. This is where having an abundance mindset really helps. If you fail one interview, it's not the end of the world. There will be more in the future. By performing a retrospective on yourself and your experience, you can better gauge what needs to be worked on. Because, after all, the only thing you have control over is your preparation, not the outcome. This ties into tip number 3, which is to focus on what you can control. People get rejected from jobs for a variety of reasons, sometimes having nothing to do with your performance. The reality is, you can't control whether you get hired or not. What you can control is how you practice, the way you communicate, and your mindset. All these things are within your control. To give you a better understanding, I want to get a little philosophical first. If you're familiar with Stoicism, then you might be familiar with the concept of dichotomy of control. Essentially, the dichotomy of control states that humans suffer for 2 main reasons. We try and control the things in life that we have no influence over, and we don't take responsibility for what we can control. All of life's anguish stems from these 2 reasons. If you only focus on your failures and don't seek improvement, then of course you're going to feel bitter and angry. And if you don't take responsibility for yourself, you'll never improve. As the Greek philosopher and Stoic Epictetus said, make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens. Alright, moving on to tip number 2, which is to start thinking in experiments. The fear of failure is in everything we do, not just coding interviews. What if I told you there's a way to get rid of this fear? All it involves is a simple mindset shift. Instead of viewing everything as a binary pass or fail, think of it as an experiment. You might be thinking, okay, how does viewing things as an experiment help? Well, thinking of something as an experiment means you're focused on learning rather than achieving a specific outcome. Failure becomes less daunting when you see it as just one possible outcome of an experiment. This helps you to not get discouraged, as even if you fail a coding interview, you still have the opportunity to learn, improve, and try again. You'd be surprised at how effective this mindset shift is. In any case, we finally reached the last tip of this video, which is to practice under pressure. It helps to think of interviewing as a muscle. The more you train, the bigger your muscles get. It's the same concept for coding interviews. The more you go on, the better you get. But how can you get better if you haven't been in many interviews before? Well, that's where mock interviews come in. The beauty of mock interviews is that you can practice your interviewing skills in a low stakes environment. After all, it's just practice. Of course, there's nothing wrong with having your friend interview you, but if you're looking for targeted feedback, then consider services such as Pramp or Interviewing.io. What better way is there to practice for your coding interviews than by getting interviewed by engineers at top tech companies? And best of all, they're anonymous. Nobody has to know who you are, and you can get the best practice you could ask for. Whether you practice with a friend or use one of these services, mock interviews should definitely be a part of your interview prepping strategy. If you can practice in a simulated environment, then all of a sudden, the real thing isn't as daunting anymore. Now, while practice is important for coding interviews, you can't get an interview if your resume sucks. If you're looking to improve your resume, then check out this video right now. It's about the resume I used to land me my first six-figure job in Fang. So do me a favor and check that out. I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you in the next one.